Hey everyone, how is everyone doing today? Thank you so much for coming to our first in a series of educational webinars that we have designed just for you. This first one, exposing the dark web and protecting your most important asset, is going to be a great one. So we're glad you could be here today, and we're going to start off by telling you a little bit about us. My name is Michelle Carlo. I am the president of CTS Services. We have been around for over 30 years. We specialize in IT management for small to mid-sized businesses. We have over 30 factory authorizations. We do IT network solutions, cybersecurity and compliance, on-site, remote, depot, hardware, and software services. With me today, I have Kim Neese, a subject matter expert on cyber security and dark web. And she is going to be with us today to give you the overview of risks, policies, and strategies to help you protect your company and its most important assets. But before I do that, I wanted to say thank you to Jack Lank from the United Chamber of Commerce. He and I both believe knowledge is power, and anything that we can do to help others in our business community is a plus. So thank you, Jack. This is a kudos for what the Chamber is doing for all of us today. So as I said, today, this webinar is the first of many in a series. Given the chaos of today's environment, we're dealing with a lot of different issues, from employee, remote workforce development, customer retention, economic uncertainties, and so many other things. Couple that with mixed technology and a host of security issues. We're all trying to navigate this crazy world that we live in. So what is this new normal? It's not so normal, and it changes every day. But what we have found is that we're all dealing with the same cybersecurity issues. More advanced cyber phishing schemes, data breaches, stolen credentials for sale on the dark web, and a really improved or hypervigilance for security and compliance in all areas. So as I turn over the reins to Kim, she will be taking the controls. This session is recorded. Any questions that you have, please put in the chat window. We will answer those at the end. And if we don't get to you, we will send this recording link and those questions to you directly. So stay tuned for a really exciting presentation on the dark web and protecting your most important assets. Here you go, Kim, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Really appreciate that. Super excited to talk today about cybersecurity and some of the threats posed by the dark web. Really hoping that everybody finds this conversation helpful, timely, and relevant, and that you're all able to take away some insights and tips to help keep your businesses safe. Look, we've all seen stories about data breaches, right? It seems like any time you turn on the news or scan the headlines, there's always a story about the latest company that got breached, how it affected millions of users and included all kinds of personal data that's now out there on the dark web. And the numbers of affected users seem to grow and increase with every new incident. In fact, you know, these headlines, I think, have become so prevalent, so normalized, that I'm afraid we've become somewhat immune and don't really know what this information can mean and the damage that it can cause. We've become so detached from the stories and the threats and the potential impacts, or we don't know what to do about it, so we do nothing. I think we're at a point, though, where we have to confront it head on by answering some important questions. Things like, what does it mean when our data, our company's data, our employees' data is on the dark web? How does that data get on the dark web, and why does it even matter? So during our time together, we'd really like to open a conversation around these questions, and we'd like to focus on the current landscape of cybersecurity as it's impacting small to medium-sized organizations. We'd also like to see if maybe we can take away some of the mystique of the dark web and pull back the curtain a bit and walk you through some actual screenshots from the dark web, as well as talk about some of the methods that cyber criminals are using to steal our data. But to start out, I'd like to give you an idea of how these breaches are happening, which ties into this idea that it's often our employees that are the greatest threat to a company's security. So here's what I mean by that. Here's an overview of the different ways that breaches can occur. It may be no surprise that the top offender is phishing scams, followed by compromised or stolen credentials, but we're not able to tell exactly how they were obtained. And then we see some other methods here, right? We see ransomware attacks, which use malicious software or malware, also listed here, that's designed to prevent access to a computer or to data until a ransom has been paid. Ransomware, it's important to note, is typically spread through phishing scams or by visiting an infected website. Other breaches are the result of hacking or through brute force attacks, which is this trial and error method where an attacker systematically tests possible passwords until they get a hit. So although we see several different ways that breaches can happen, what I'd like to emphasize here is that the majority involve credentials being stolen. I think this is important for us to acknowledge. We have to think about the impact stolen credentials can have on an organization, because a single compromised credential could result in a breach, stolen data, a ransomware attack. It all points back to those stolen credentials, whether through a phishing attack or brute force attack, employees clicking on an email they shouldn't, downloading an attachment that has malware. All of that starts at that human level. So as we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, I think we need to acknowledge that it's skewed towards human error. This is essential for us to understand so that we can empower our employees to become more aware and vigilant and understand the impact of what stolen credentials mean. We have to train team members to play a vital role in our company's overall security. So let's dig into this just a bit and talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. Here's a great visual that helps us understand how real and broad the risk can be. We're looking at 9 key functional areas of business here, from HR and payroll to email, purchasing, banking and finance, and so on. As you look through here, I'd like you to start to think about all of those places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions. All of the places where they're creating accounts and they're using their work email addresses and creating a password. We can't ignore these third-party sites where employees are creating those logins. We have to think about those external threats, and I think in doing so, we have to talk about that human behavior piece and ask ourselves some hard questions. You know, are we confident that employees are using unique, hard-to-crack passwords for every single site that they're using? Can we be sure they're not recycling passwords, or almost just as worse, adding that token character or two at the end and thinking they're all good? Because this is where that data on the dark web can come back to hurt your company. When these accounts are connected by common emails and passwords, when users are using the same or a variation of the same login credentials on multiple sites. So let's say, for example, I use Expedia to book my travel, and Expedia experiences a breach, and I'm using that same password on, say, Office Depot, where maybe I have an account with a corporate card on file to make purchases. Or what if I'm using that password somewhere on the network? Once someone has a password to gain entry into your organization's network, they really have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And you can see how the potential for damage dramatically increases from just a single compromised username and password. As a quick example, I was talking to an IT provider last week who told me about a client of theirs who had just gone through something similar to what we're talking about here. They had an employee who received an email that appeared to have been sent by DocuSign, something they used quite regularly for contracts and agreements and such. The employee clicked the link in the email and entered his email and password. And using those same credentials that he entered, the cyber criminal was able to access his account and send an email to their banking institution instructing them to wire $50,000 to an offshore account. The bank didn't call to verify the request and wired the money, $50,000 straight into the hands of the cyber criminal. The organization had to get the FBI and the Treasury involved, and it was a really long, drawn-out affair. In the end, the organization did get their money back in this case since the bank didn't follow protocol, but that was after a really long and drawn-out and a lot of time and resources spent to resolve. So you can see how just a single exposed email and password can have this domino effect that can lead to lost revenue, downtime, and damaged reputation. Just a lot of potential for disaster when those bad guys get their hands on employee data. So with the prevalence of data breaches and stolen employee data, we need to think about security through the lens of what's known as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is an acknowledgement and belief that everybody has been compromised. That if we ran a dark web scan for all of the attendees on this webinar, for example, every person on here would likely have something pop up. Once we operate under an assumption that everyone has been compromised, we can shift our focus to access management. So that's making sure that the right people have the right secure access to the appropriate machines and at the right privileges. Meanwhile, of course, we're monitoring for those external threats as well. This framework lets us manage individual access to make sure that we don't have team members accessing the network when and where they shouldn't, or logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or having privileges to sensitive data and applications that are beyond what's needed for their particular job. Establishing this cybersecurity framework really allows us to identify and address any gaps. But beyond that, zero trust allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws, which dictate how we approach security and access management. Because here's the thing, compliance and privacy are no longer optional. I don't want to spend a ton of time on compliance during this particular conversation, but I think it's important to note that compliance regulations have certainly made their way around the world. Started with the GDPR in Europe, which was the first entry into making compliance mandatory, and now it's here in every state, with California and New York setting the bar really high. Cybersecurity is no longer this nice to have, it's really mandatory and something that businesses are now required to do. We have continued to see year-over-year increases in phishing scams, and it's picked up even more during the COVID pandemic, as noted by the FBI, who warned businesses of that growing threat. The pandemic is really this dream come true for cyber criminals, and these past several months have presented just a huge opportunity to snag victims. During a crisis, we're more on edge, we're seeking out information and direction and guidance, and it's really this perfect time to capitalize on the uncertainty, the rapid changes, and just the overall disruption that makes us even more susceptible to phishing emails. I think because we're so hungry for information and we're accessing information in different ways and at different times than normal, they know that we're less likely to take the time to really examine a message and make good decisions on whether to open and click. So not surprisingly, we have seen a surge in COVID-related phishing scams, and lots of them. Here's a real example that we pulled that plays on our need to stay up to date on the latest news and developments. In this case, it appears to come from the CDC and includes a link to new cases in the area. We've pointed out some telltale signs here that can help a user identify this as a scam: fake email address, the generic greeting, the poor grammar. But these messages, I think, are really timely and relevant, and for the distracted and emotional and information-hungry user, I think they can be really effective as well. But why limit phishing scams to just email? Cyber criminals have realized that they can also carry these scams out through text messages too. We've always got our phones on us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. How easy is it to be caught off guard and see a new text message that we click on without really stopping to think about it? So phishing emails are getting increasingly sophisticated and tough to detect, but there really are steps that we can take to identify those scams. We've all been focused on good hygiene and washing our hands to decrease our risk to the coronavirus. What if we applied that same hygiene to our email? What if we trained our employees to take at least 20 seconds to examine an email and look for those telltale signs? We know there are things that we can look for to help weed out the scams from those legitimate emails. Here's a list of some of the key things that we can look for. We can see if the message includes super generic content or that broad impersonal greeting. Always look closely at the email address, particularly the domain. A lot of times it'll be off by just a single letter or number, but that's really all it takes to tip off that it's a scam. Consider if the message is trying to create this false sense of urgency, or maybe it's got some strong demands for action. And then look very closely at any link before clicking. A simple mouse over can tell us if the destination looks legit or if it might be steering us into a trap. I think it's always helpful to put on that copy editor hat and look for any misspelled words or incorrect grammar or weird messaging, and always make sure that a site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, think twice, maybe even 3 times before clicking on any attachments. Most computer viruses are spread through email attachments, so although that attachment may look important and urgent, it can have malware that can cause a whole lot of damage. I think so often we can be in a rush and distracted when checking email, but if we just take those 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can really save a lot of trouble and potential down the road. And I think it's this kind of education, as well as ongoing security awareness training, that can really help you change your employees' behavior, establish those good habits, and create a culture of security within your organization. We've already focused a lot on the fact that our employees, while often one of our greatest assets, can also be a weakest link in security. And I'm not talking about those rogue or malicious employees. I'm talking about those well-meaning employees who click on a bad link or open a bad attachment or use the same password over and over and over again. We need to train those employees to be vigilant and cautious. And I think an effective ongoing security awareness program can really help reduce a company's vulnerabilities by building that human firewall, which can turn employees into an integral part of cyber defenses. To underscore this need for a solid security awareness program, I'd like to show how easy it can be to launch successful phishing scams, since they're one of the easiest yet most effective ways that employee data is stolen. Phishing kits like this one are available for purchase on the dark web, and cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, can easily launch phishing campaigns using these pre-made templates and step-by-step instructions. As part of those phishing kits, legitimate websites are cloned, and that login page is changed to point to a credential stealing site. Emails are then sent, obviously, to point to those spoofed websites. Here's a side-by-side example of the actual Facebook landing page and the landing page included with one of these phishing kits. It's nearly impossible to tell the difference between the two, and I think you can see how effective it is. Most users, probably including me, would be hard-pressed to tell the difference here. So we know that the dark web refers to that part of the internet that's intentionally hidden and inaccessible through standard browsers and methods, and we know that there's a thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials on the dark web. But I don't know that we have a clear picture of exactly what the dark web looks like, how it operates, how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So we thought it would be helpful to share some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed so that we can get a good look at the dark web. Here's a snapshot. A criminal organization is offering up credit cards to buyers. It's probably a little tough to read, but it's essentially an advertisement for the full package. Actual physical credit cards complete with pins and spending limits, everything that someone needs to put these to good use. And this company, or this cyber criminal organization, will ship to buyers discreetly via FedEx, so your neighbors won't even know what you're up to. Or how about this one? It's a big election year, but not even our voter registration info is safe. This product offering includes the personal data for 1.8 million Kansas voters, including their names, addresses, dates of birth, and more. But it's not just in Kansas. Here's the same offer for lots of other states. Notice these prices, $10,000 plus for stolen credentials, and these are just the ones that we were able to fit on the slide. We wanted to touch quickly on a couple emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. We've seen a trend where ransomware attacks escalate to extortion. It goes a little something like this. The general consensus has always been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, don't pay the ransom because there's just no guarantee that you're going to get your data back anyway. But now cyber criminals are saying, okay, fine, if you don't pay the ransom, I'm going to release your data on the dark web anyway and to make some money and destroy your business and its reputation. I think it's just another example of how cyber criminals are getting smarter and more sophisticated in the way that they're executing these attacks. And speaking of ransomware, we've also seen the emergence of ransomware as a service, which shows just how sophisticated and turnkey some of these methodologies are. Ransomware as a service borrows, of course, from the software as a service or SaaS framework. For a subscription costing just a few $100s a month, cyber criminals can get a nice branded platform like this to log into. They can add in all of the contacts and companies that they want to launch an attack against. And then there are even pre-made templates ready to go. They essentially just sit back and monitor the attack through their dashboard, track who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. This whole ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize ransomware attacks for deployment at a pretty large scale, and it allows even the novice cyber criminal to launch attacks without too much difficulty. And then also, not sure if you're looking for a career change, but this is a real job posting, and the Dark Overlord is hiring. He pays quite well. This is for just 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking. A cyber criminal can make a whopping $762,000 to start, increasing to just over $2 million in a couple years. What I find so interesting is that there's a probationary period, performance reviews, just like a legitimate company might put in place. And then finally, lots of us are using Zoom to meet and collaborate while working from home. With the dramatic increase in usage also came security concerns. Excuse me. And one particular area of concern is that new Zoom bombing phenomenon where uninvited attendees troll Zoom meetings with the sole intent of disrupting the meeting, often doing some pretty disturbing and troubling things. Well, hackers got a hold of a bunch of compromised Zoom accounts and posted them on the dark web so that bad actors can get everything they need to bomb these meetings. So we've talked quite a bit about ways that cyber criminals can steal data, how that data is bought and sold on the dark web, and how easy and sophisticated their methodologies can be. But this doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. There are some serious threats out there that can cause some serious damage to your business. But if we are aware of those threats and if we take steps to increase security, we can really minimize those risks and help protect your business and your employees. Here are some tips to start moving in that direction. Some of these we've already touched on, but just wanted to circle back on compliance. As we said, compliance is no longer optional. Businesses are required to take steps to protect data and privacy, but compliance regulations can be overwhelming and time-consuming and frustrating. You can lessen some of that stress and worry by automating compliance through a web portal system that can help track and organize everything. We've talked quite a bit about the ramifications of exposed passwords. So it's incredibly important to help employees protect those passwords, both on the network and off, perhaps through something like a password manager. You can also add an extra layer of security through a two-factor authentication. Part of that zero trust framework that we've touched on is ensuring that the right users have the right access, and two-factor authentication can help with that. There's some great solutions out there that provide a balance between convenience and security. Also, monitor the dark web. We talked quite a bit about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. Ongoing credential monitoring can provide those critical early alerts that can help prevent a potential costly and widespread data breach. And then finally, most importantly, bring in a team that you trust to help put together the security strategies that will work best for your company. Really lean on them to provide the guidance and advice that will help you stay on top of the changing threat landscape. You're busy, you've got your hands full running a business, bring in the experts that you trust to help figure out where you are today with security and put in place a plan to get where you want to be. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it back over to Michelle to provide some concluding thoughts on all of this.
So, wow, that was super exciting, Kim. Thank you so much. Just a quick short story about a recent situation. We had a new client come on board. They had a new employee. We have been doing some security and compliance for them. Their password for a banking site ended up on the dark web. And so that user had not gone through some educational training, which was a good lesson learned. So, you know, there you have it. There's so many things that you can do for your company to protect it against all of these exploitations. What we'd like you to do is, if you are interested, any participant, we will offer you a free report on the state of the dark web. We will provide a free, no cost, no obligation dark web scan for you or your business. Just send us an email, and then we'll discuss with you those findings and how it impacts your business. So, and what risks would be involved from those credentials if we do find them. With that said, we are doing a whole series of educational seminars coming up in the next few months. We welcome your attendance. We appreciate your feedback. And if we can do anything for you in the interim, just let us know. And we so thank you for joining us today and learning about the dark web. We're going to open it up to questions right now that have come in through the panel. So Bob, why don't you take over?
Okay, Kim and Michelle, thank you. That was great. I've got 4 questions that have come in. The first one is, how do I get my credentials off of the dark web once they've been exposed? What's the answer to that one?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one, and probably not one where the asker is going to like the answer. But unfortunately, there is no way to remove credentials from the dark web once they're out there. That's one of the reasons why I think exposures can be so troublesome. I think it's once it's out there, it's always out there, and that's why, you know, a knowledgeable team can help guide you through and mitigate any potential risks. And I think it's important to mention that since scammers sometimes piggyback on attacks, so once they've successfully executed one, they'll try to launch another one with additional, maybe more targeted approaches. So that ongoing dark monitoring piece can really provide those critical early alerts if any new exposures hit the dark web, so that swift action can be taken.
Okay, great. Just this morning, I got an email notified by a company that they were breached and that my information might be there. So I'm going to be giving you my address later. How often do you check for stolen emails and passwords on the dark web? I mean, what's the best practices?
Yeah, it's a great question. So ongoing credential monitoring is just that. It's actually, I wouldn't call it necessarily scanning the dark web. It is monitoring the dark web 24/7, 365, so that as soon as a new exposure, any email address with your company's email domain is found on the dark web, it's immediately reported to the portal so that the follow-up can happen, and hopefully any risks can be averted or mitigated. So it really is ongoing and all the time, every day, all day.
Okay. This next question, I'm assuming, comes from a stakeholder or company owner, president, or business leader of some sort. If I find out that my employees have stolen info on the dark web, in other words, they've been compromised, what should we do about it?
Yeah, another really great and important question, and I hate to keep harping on this, but first and foremost, you definitely want to work with a security provider. They have the expertise to be able to step in, assess the situation, and decide on next steps. Sometimes there may be a need to scan a computer, the computer of the user and/or the network, and there may be some security checks that need to happen. So, first and foremost, always a good idea to check with your IT security provider.
Okay.
For the actual user, for the employee, definitely they have to change that password immediately and everywhere. So that means, asking them to sit down and make a list of all of the sites where they're using that password that's been exposed or any variation of it. We know now that cyber criminals are motivated and they're automated. So they're going to test that email and password combination pretty quickly and efficiently across hundreds, if not thousands, of popular sites. So we really do have to encourage that user to sit down, think of all the places where those passwords are being used, and change it anywhere and everywhere. And then it's always a good idea, obviously, they're going to keep an eye on all of their accounts, especially any financial accounts, for any unusual activity, and certainly check with the organization that was breached and notify that organization as soon as possible if, again, any unusual activity is noted.
During this time, in addition, all of those furloughed workers that may or may not be back, we need to assess you need to assess what their roles were. And although they may be slated as inactive on your network, the sites that they went to and the roles that they played, their credentials are still there unless those accounts were deactivated. So it's important to know what role they had, what their responsibilities were, and change those as well if they have not come back to work.
Okay, I have one more question, but then I'm going to add one of my own. How does the dark web scanning actually work?
Yeah, great question. So there's no download or software or anything. It is providers can enter the top level company email domain into the portal to provide that continuous monitoring that we talked about. And Dark Web ID is going to scan and monitor the dark web all the time continuously for stolen user data associated with any email address at that top level email domain. The service scours everything from botnets, criminal chat rooms, blogs, websites, peer-to-peer networks, forums, and other black market sites to look for and identify any data related to those top-level email domains. I think it's important to note we are or the service does report email addresses and passwords, and also is going to notate if there's any personally identifiable information or PII also found in the exposure. That can be incredibly valuable information, not just for the company, but also for that individual if they have some sensitive personal information on the dark web. As soon as a compromise is detected, it's reported to the portal, providing the IT provider with the opportunity to follow up immediately and alert so that, again, potential costly and widespread data breaches can be avoided.
Okay. Another person asks, do you have any suggested malware scan programs?
So with that said, depending upon your environment, we offer and can provide a number of those offerings. So on a sidebar level, we can reach out to you, and based upon your environment and requirements, we can provide those tools to you.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier, Michelle, about the free scan. What's in that report? What's it look like? What do people
So
expect?
basically, if and should you decide that you want to have us run a dark web scan on your domain or your email address, we will run the scan. We will provide a report to you, and we will give you a call. We will tell you about the findings and how they actually relate to you, and what next steps you should take if they find any. So with that said, by all means, anybody that is on this, or your friends or family or business associates that need a dark web scan, we're offering that at no charge to you, as a service to protect businesses, because we're basically all in this together. We find something, we'll review what we find and tell you how it will impact you going forward.
So how do they request it?
So they can follow the slide. They can email questions or requests to me at mcarlo@ctsservices.com.
Great. I don't have any other questions that have come in.
Well, I think that this has been so fabulous. Thank you, Kim, for your expert feedback and information of how we as business leaders and users can protect